Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about axe angles, splitting axe angles and maul angles. Why they're more relevant in Australia than they would be overseas. Main reason is we actually got the hardest wood in the world. Now if you do a search you'll see Australian bull oak that will turn around and say that it's 16.7 kilonewtons on the Janka scale. But there is another wood that's actually harder than that that's in Australia, but it's non-commercial. So the bull oak is a commercial type timber. So a lot of these ratings that you see overseas, when they talk about the hardest wood in the world, whether it's Brazilian walnut or some sort of ash or oak, it's because it's a commercial type timber, so there's a rating on there. And as I said, we actually got the hardest wood in the world. And that non-commercial wood is a wood called Acacia puce. It's 20 kilonewtons on the Janka scale. It's also referred to as waddy wood. Have a bit of a picture up there. It's a very small tree. It grows around Birdsville, so they refer to it as a Birdsville wattle. It grows on the edge of the desert there, up in South Australia. So it's actually a protected species now because there's not a lot of it. For those people that find a branch or something like that there, it's sought after for a lot of people that do a bit of woodwork and want a piece of that nice colours and everything else like that there through the timber, very dark. So because we've got the hardest wood in the world, and the difference between hardwood and softwood is the grain structure and density. So the grain structure on Pinus radiata is longer fibres. Typically all softwoods will have the grains that are fairly thin, between 2 and 4 millimeters in length. And most of the time they're not interlocking or twisting. When you get to the Australian eucalypts, they're all short fibre, between 0.5 of a millimetre and 1.5 millimetres in length. They twist, they interlock, and they can be very knotty as well. This makes them exceptionally difficult to split. Now, I'm not saying that there's other timber in the world that's difficult to split. I'm just saying that our particular type of timber that we get is very difficult to split compared to softwood timber. That presents a problem with a lot of the times that the imported axes or splitting mauls that we get, and even the local products like this Cyclone. This is a Cyclone axe. Cyclone is a company here in Australia, over 100 years old. They used to make Cyclone fences. They made quite a few products. Then they started making axes, splitting mauls, splitting axes as well. So typically this is a 2 kg axe. Now normally the shape of an axe has hollowed out cheeks, so this part is slightly hollowed out. The variation can vary between manufacturer and manufacturer. It helps the axe to not stick in the timber as much. And typically this angle that you see here is around about 12 degrees, anywhere from 12 to 15. It can be up to 18 degrees, but typically it's around 15, something like that. The next is this beveled angle across the blade. This is very important. Now this angle can be as low as 18 degrees and it can be as high as 30 degrees. So typically 25 degrees is not a bad angle for a homeowner type axe. A racing axe will be totally different. It could only be in the low teens, around 17, 18 maximum. So typically your axe is the reason that it gets stuck in the timber is because when we have a look at the head you can see that it's fairly thin, the cheeks. There's all different designs. I've seen the cheeks can be almost parallel like that. So there's all different designs, and most of them are designed to penetrate the wood, but also designed so that when you strike the axe in there, that it gets rid of the chip as well. So that's one of the other things that an axe must do, penetrate and get rid of the chip at the same time. Now, when we talk about the secondary bevel, this angle that's on here, you can come to a point like that, or you can come to a bullet shape. There's all different type of shapes, or there's something in between. The width of the bevel, you may hear about a micro bevel, which could be a 0.5 millimeter edge on there. I had to reprofile this because I wasn't happy with it. I had to reprofile most of my splitting axes and mauls. There's only 2 brands that I've never had to reprofile. The first is Fiskars that come in the splitting axes. The splitting maul had to be reprofiled. It has a wedge. The primary wedge of the Fiskus maul is about 30 degrees, and it had about a 55 degree on the bevel. I changed that to about 40 degrees. So I had to reprofile. Virtually everything that I've had to reprofile. Even the Stihl Ochsenkopf as well. It had about a 60 degree angle on it. I've probably got it down to about 40 degrees at the moment. The other one that I didn't have to reprofile was the Estwing 2.7 kg, and we can just put a picture of that up there. If you actually have a look at it, it's got a beautiful machined finish. Now, typically that's probably about a 40 degree angle, and the cheeks are hollowed out quite a lot. So there's all different designs that you can, and not one design is just, if you ask what's the best design, you can't give a good answer to that, because all the wood species are different, and you'll find out one axe may work better with one particular type of fibre than the other. So typically when we look at an axe, we're looking at about anywhere from 11 degrees up to about 18 degree angle on here, and this beveled angle can be as low as 18 degrees up to about 30 degrees. So that's typically what you can do. And the width of the bevel can vary. That's up to the user. You can find out that you could only have a 0.5 millimeter beveled edge, or you could have a couple of millimeter beveled edge. I probably tend to have a main bevel that's different than the cheeks, and then a micro bevel on the edge, just a very, very small bevel. So in this particular axe here, this is probably about 25 degrees here with a micro bevel of about 30 degrees. A couple of swipes of the file just to give it a bit different angle, and then hone that in with a stone and a diamond stone as well, and then finish that off with a leather strop, and that is razor sharp. So that's typically an axe of approximately 2 kilograms. That's your typical type axe. Works well in all sorts of timber, and especially in hardwood, it's got the right angles. The next is a splitting axe. This comes from Stihl, made by Ochsenkopf over in Germany. That's a German company, Ochsenkopf. They make their own, but Stihl have decided to use them. And this splitting axe weighs 2.5 kg, but has a total weight of 3.9 kg. It's got this metal overstrike protector and another metal piece on the end here. And the handle adds up to the weight as well, so it's nearly hitting 4 kg. Its primary angle is around about 20 degrees. And when I brought it, this edge here was only about 3 millimeter edge on it, but it was about 60 degrees. 60 degree edge is only good for softwood. Certainly not in Australia. It's no good for hardwood. So I had to reprofile this down to about 45 degrees. I could have went to 30 degrees, but I would have had to remove a lot more metal. Typically what I do would be, when I buy a new axe, I'll take it down in the yard and I'll get a nice bit of hardwood and I'll attempt to split it. Well, it started bouncing off. So after I tried it 3-4 times, I thought, no, it's bouncing off, wrong angle. I could tell just by looking at it. So then I proceeded to reprofile this edge and took 20 degrees, 10 degrees aside. So I've got an included angle of around about 45 degrees. I wouldn't go any more than 45 degrees. 45 degrees is the highest angle that I would go for. The lowest angle, you could quite easily put a 30-degree angle on here and it would actually work a little bit better, but it does work all right at 45 degrees. It's just that it doesn't work very good at 60. So, and it's got a fairly large distance across the blade. It's about 120 millimeters. So it's a different design. It works very good. I'm very happy with this. I can use this for hours on end before I get tired. The one at the back, and we'll just get this out of the way, is a block splitter. It's 8 pounds. It's quite heavy. And it's got a total weight of 4.8 kilograms. And when I brought this, it totally had the wrong angle on it, on the secondary bevel. The primary bevel is 30 degrees. The secondary bevel was 108. So what we'll do, we'll just put this picture up. This picture is what it looked like before. And if you have a look, it's 108.7. Well, all of this did was bounce off the log. After repeated hitting, about 10 or 15 times, it just kept off bouncing. And I kept the log because you can see the marks that it put in there. And that's what it did. So I struck. This was fairly large. This was probably about, this is only about 1/8. You can tell by the angle there. It was about 1.5 feet in diameter. So after hitting it about 12 times, I knew that it wasn't going to bust that open. Even though you can see there's splits in it everywhere, it didn't break it open. It wasn't until I reprofiled it that it would bust it open. And you can see that if I put, that fits exactly right in there like that. See? So it had to be reprofiled, and this is 30 degrees, and I've got about a 1.5 mil bevel on here of about 45 degrees. 1.5 mil bevel at 45 degrees is fine. So what I'd like to say is, irrespective of what angle that you've got on here, you can't reduce this angle more or less than what you've got here. Because if this is 30 degrees, you've got to either keep it at 30 degrees, but I increased it to about 45 degrees included angle. And that works fine because it's such a small angle. And if you looked at the picture before, we can bring that up again, you can see that if you look at the edges, they're about 4 or 5 millimeters in width. And that's why it's so difficult for it to penetrate, because of the width of that bevel is so wide. And because of that bevel is 108 degrees, it is just so difficult to penetrate the wood. And that's the problem with a lot of these cheap splitting axes coming into the market. They are way off on the angle. So the best advice that I could give to anyone is that you go for the smallest angle possible where physically possible. And as I said, if that's 30 degrees, you can't go less than 30 degrees. The beveled angle's got to be more than 30 degrees. So where possible, have that number reduced. Now, on the Steel Oxenkoff, it had a primary angle of 20. So therefore, quite easy to put even a 25-degree beveled angle on there if you wanted to. But I didn't want to remove any more metal. I wanted to try it out, and it works quite good. Now, what I got here is just a bit of diagram of a log. And I thought this was quite useful information as well. That when you split a log in excess of, say, 1 foot to 1.5 foot, 2 foot, that you should split, if this is the splitter, don't try and split it in the middle like that. Try and split it around the edges, so try and sink it in here, along here somewhere, or sink it in along here or here. Try and split it into quarters, and then you can split it in half. But if you just concentrate on the middle, you'll find out that it is very, very difficult to split, because even though that it's interlocked and twisted fibres, they do split better around parallel as possible with the growth rings. And that's the best way to split. You can split with an axe, but if you do split with an axe, and I've done it many, many times, and people used to do it in the old days before they had log splitters and block splitters, is that you don't try and split really big, huge timber, because the axe will get stuck in there. But certainly splitting with the growth rings is definitely the way to go. So I hope that information helps. It's just that the wood that we have, our eucalypts, and some of the best burning timber is red gum. It splits reasonably good. You got spotted gum, stringy bark, that splits a lot easier. Iron bark and grey box, they're much more difficult to split. Iron bark is about 14 on the Janka scale, and grey box is about 15 on the Janka scale. And we spoke before about waddy wood being 20 kilonewtons and Australian bull oak being around 16.7 kilonewtons. So all of the eucalypt trees that we have in Australia are very hardwood. Some are harder than others. Some have different fibre structures, not as twisting or interlocking or as knotty, and they tend to split a lot easier. So I hope that information helps. It's mainly having a lower angle on your secondary bevel that helps to penetrate the wood on Australian hardwood. So they're being imported into the country with wide angles on them, and you need to reprofile them. If you can't reprofile them, I'd probably tend to stick with Fiscus or something else. Fiscus have a 25-degree primary wedge on their splitting axes and 30 degrees on their secondary bevel. And this is a Fiscus sharpener. There's little rollers in here, ceramic type rollers. This is a 30-degree angle. One side's for knives. This side here is for an axe. And these work really good. And Fiscus are very, very popular here in Australia. And I'd probably say the reason that they're so popular is because they're very sharp and got the right angles for Aussie hardwood. So Fiscus have got it right. Unfortunately, a lot of other manufacturers don't get it right and send us splitting axes or mauls that have got the wrong angle. And there's another misconception. People believe, and manufacturers say it, that they don't have to be sharp. Well, that's just absolute rubbish, because the sharper the edge of an axe or splitting axe or maul is, the much easier it will penetrate the timber. It's as simple as that. In Pinus radiata, you don't have those problems. Pinus radiata is long fibres, it's not interlocking, it's not twisting, it'll bust open very, very easily. Unfortunately, we don't use Pinus radiata or softwoods for firewood. We have Australian hardwoods, and they're very hard and they're very difficult to split. And hopefully, if you can remember to split this way with the growth rings, that will eliminate a lot of your troubles. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.